But I'm excited to talk to you about an important subject, which is personal protective equipment. Recently, we've all been talking a little more about OSHA and what OSHA inspections mean and what to look at. And one of the things that I observed I was going through an OSHA inspection with one of our members. This is something that they focused on quite a bit, and that was the hazard assessment for personal protective equipment. And so along with that, we wanted to get this word back out here and talk about personal protective equipment and the importance it plays in keeping our employees safe on the job. So some kind of scary statistics come out of this. A couple of million work-related injuries each year. A quarter of those are to the head, eyes, hands, or feet. Hard hats, people aren't wearing their hard hats. They only had 16% of people had their hard hat on when they had a head injury. 1% of the 770 face injuries were using face protection. So you get the picture here. We may not be using PPE like we should. 40% of the eye injuries were eye protection. It can happen with safety glasses, but in most cases, people just aren't using the right stuff. So here's a couple of objectives. I got a lot of material, so I'm going to go through this quick today. We want to learn the basics of personal protective equipment and how to use that. We want to help you to maintain compliance or achieve compliance with OSHA and other regulations. But the most important thing is to keep workers safe and healthy and able to do their jobs comfortably and avoid some of those nasty incidents that can happen. There's a general principle in safety that's called the hierarchy of controls. Hierarchy of controls means that we're trying to engineer out hazards, not just throw people into personal protective equipment or say, well, we have a chemical exposure that's worse than we want to have somebody exposed to, so we're going to rotate workers through there. So everybody gets that dose for a little while. Our preference in the hierarchy of controls is let's eliminate the hazard. If I can get rid of that nasty chemical, or I can eliminate that exposed rotating part that could wrap somebody up, that's better than just putting a guard on it or putting in some sort of putting our employees in a respirator or gloves or something to protect us from the hazard. So our primary control should be engineering that out, removing the hazard. Now that's not always possible. Sometimes we can do an administrative control, like I talked. Well, let's limit the amount of time our people are exposed to this. That would be next. And personal protective equipment always should be our last line of defense. That's something, once we've eliminated all of the other options, if we weren't able to eliminate the hazard, we weren't able to use an administrative control to reduce the exposure, then we get down to personal protective equipment. Now, we can't go through life in a big bubble to protect us from all things. But we can have personal protective equipment to form a barrier between us and the hazards that we're facing. Problem is, it is really our last line of defense, and we should always remember it that way. It's not just my PPE is going to protect me. There is no perfect PPE. Everything has its nemesis. Everything can be damaged. Everything can fail. There's something out there that will dissolve every glove on the market. There's something out there that can cause any of our personal protective equipment to fail, and so we have to keep that in mind. But besides that, one of the major rules of personal protective equipment is to have it with you and to use it. Many times we'll see incidents that happen and they weren't wearing their PPE, and when you ask about that, did you have safety glasses, did you have gloves or earplugs or whatever it may be? Yes. Where were they? They were in the truck, or I forgot it back at the shop. I just didn't have it, and so I decided to use the safety squint That means I close my eyes so I can't see much, and hope for the best that when I'm grinding that grinding that material, it doesn't get through my safety squint. I guess the big question is, will you be ready for the unexpected? Most of the time, if it's expected, we can compensate for things, but the unexpected is always out there. And so personal protective equipment can help us in that vein. Here's the overall OSHA requirement on this. I threw it on here. It says the employer shall. You know what shall means? Shall means will. And if you don't do it, that means you can be cited. The employer shall verify that the required workplace hazard assessment has been performed through a written certification. What the heck does that mean? That means you've got to look at every job duty that you have and come up with some paperwork to document what type of personal protective equipment is required for that job. Now, if it's an office job, we probably don't need to do a hazard assessment for that, but anything outside of that, if you have people in public works or mosquito abatement or out doing landscape work, whatever it is, there should be a written certification for each one of those job descriptions that says what you have done, but this is by the employer that certifies, I've looked at this and here's what they need to wear, and I'm going to make sure they do it. Okay, so that certification that identifies the workplace evaluated, the person certifying that the evaluation has been performed, the dates of the hazard assessment, and which identifies the document as a certification of hazard assessment. Holy cow! You've got to put your name on the line as the designated felon if things go wrong. This is right in the OSHA standard. So how do I do this? Well, I am going to send out a sample, maybe a couple of sample hazard assessments that you can use that will satisfy this requirement. But you need to do that on each of your job descriptions. And we've got to look at what the hazards are and how we're going to protect the employees, and document it and sign. Okay. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff to go through today. We're going to look at eye and face protection, head protection, hand protection, foot protection, respiratory protection, hearing protection, and whole body protection. Some of those will go into more detail than others, but we'll hit all of those to a certain extent. So PPE selection, we need to evaluate the job. Like I said, for that certification, we need to use the right PPE for the job. Can I use leather gloves when I'm working with sulfuric acid? The answer is yes, I can, but that's the wrong PPE, and that sulfuric acid not only will eat those gloves, but it will soak right through and it will eat my hands away. So we've got to ensure that we've got the right PPE for the job. The wrong PPE can be worse than nothing at all. You know, we kind of laugh at this picture on the screen here, but I've known multiple people who have worked overseas in some developing countries where they were using either no PPE or the wrong PPE because they couldn't get it or they couldn't afford it. And early in my career, I talked with this guy right as China was really getting booming, and this guy was one of the first people I talked to who had gone to China, and he expressed to me concern. He's like, wow, when I was in China, he said there were these people in these shops and they were welding. And he said they didn't know, not only did they not have a welding hood, they didn't even have safety glasses, they didn't have anything. And and he said, I just felt for these people because they were burning their eyes out, and when they when they couldn't weld anymore, they couldn't see, they were fired, and they went away and they got somebody else and put in that position. So this guy told me, he says I went out to a store and he says I bought sunglasses for him and gave all these welders sunglasses, and I didn't have the heart to tell him, well, those won't necessarily protect you. And now there would be maybe from flying objects, but they aren't going to protect him from the ultraviolet and other radiation sources that come off of that welding arc. Anyway, so we need to look at our situation here and say, wow, we are fortunate to be able to have good equipment, stuff that's comfortable to wear, and that will protect us from the hazards that are out there. But let's choose the right stuff. How do we choose the right stuff? There are multiple selection guides that are available. For example, if I'm getting a glove to protect me from some chemicals, I can go to the manufacturer of the glove that I'd like to purchase, and they have a selection guide. And that will tell me, is this glove appropriate for the type of material that I'm using? Sometimes we have to go to experts. Sometimes it's a respiratory protection. Hey, I've got this chemical at this concentration, or I don't know what the concentration is. Help me determine what we need to use for respiratory protection. And that's one of the things that we at the Trust here are here for, is to help out if you have some tough challenges there. So don't hesitate to give us a call if you have a concern or a question on that. But for most things, it's pretty simple to use a guide. Here's an example from one of the glove manufacturers. Along the top, they have all of the different types of chemical-resistant gloves that they market. And along the left-hand side, down that column, they have different chemicals. And just for a quick example on this, Brent, that works here with us in loss prevention, has always wanted to open a nail salon. Isn't that right, Brent?
Yeah, right.
I didn't think I was just seeing if he was still paying attention there. So Brent's always wanted to open a nail salon. And you ask yourself, what kind of hazards would you have at a nail salon? If the artists in there working on nails are doing a job, there's some hazards associated with that job. And so one of the most common things we think about would be fingernail polish remover, acetone, fingernail polish itself, and maybe bloodborne pathogens. So as you're working on nails, there's a possibility that if people's cuticles are as rough as mine, they might bleed a little bit, and you could be exposed to bloodborne pathogens. So we think about that. What kind of glove could we get? We have to select something that is appropriate for the job. Well, these people are doing fine, detailed work, and so they need something with some manual dexterity. So we look at these gloves here, and none of those really look like the type of glove, but the material is what we're really looking at on those gloves. We might be tempted to go out to Costco or Sam's Club, where I can buy those little examination gloves cheap. Those are made out of nitrile, and they're we're just getting this nail salon started, and it's pretty cheap. And it's pretty cheap to go out to one of these discount stores, and I can buy multiple boxes for not a lot of money. So we're considering doing that. We take a look at this chart, and we say, oh, that green glove that we see there is a nitrile. That's the same material as those little examination gloves. Let's see if we have any problem with the major chemical of concern. That would be acetone. So you can't see my cursor there. I go down to the third line on that chart, and it says acetone, and I move over to where that green glove is, and it has a big NR highlighted in red. That NR means not recommended. That means that when I spill acetone on this glove, it will dissolve and get right on that artist's hands. That's a problem. It's a pretty simple task to go in and select the appropriate material if we're dealing with a chemical. Other things may be more challenging, like a respiratory protection, but in most cases, it's a fairly simple task to select the right stuff. But let's not leave it up to our employees to do their own selection. Let's go and determine what's correct, and then set some standards. Here's your hazard assessment. This is the type of personal protective equipment you have to do when you're doing these tasks. And we need to train the employees. Once I've made that determination, they need to know when PPE is necessary, what PPE is necessary, how to properly don and doff that, how to adjust it if you have the ability to adjust it. What's the proper way to wear that? And then you say, well, dummy, that's not hard. Well, something as simple as turning my hard hat around backwards could actually make that piece of PPE not work the way it was intended or designed, and not give us the protection that we need. We also need to train our employees on what the limitations are of personal protective equipment. We've talked about that, just already alluded to that a little bit, that there is something out there that is the nemesis of every piece of PPE, and if we go beyond what the normal use and expected use of that PPE is, it might cause us harm. We also need to train employees on the proper care, maintenance, useful life, and disposal of PPE. Certain tasks, like those blue gloves or green gloves, excuse me, they're blue when I buy them. Those nitrile gloves, the little examination gloves, they're a single use. When you're done with those, you throw them away. Most people don't have a problem with that. However, something like a dust mask or a filtering face piece respirator, people have a challenge throwing those away. I don't know why, but let them know this is a single use. Other things like a hard hat have, and really all PPE have a useful lifetime, but most people say, well, if a hard hat isn't broken, it's good. And that's not really the case. Each manufacturer will have a useful lifetime for that PPE, and if we go beyond that, the manufacturer is going to disavow all responsibility for that, and OSHA could give you a citation for it. That was one area that OSHA was focusing on. If they saw a hard hat on somebody's head or on a shelf somewhere, they wanted to look at it to see, when was this put into use? Has it gone beyond its useful lifetime? So just for that example, we look at a hard hat as being useful lifetime is based on the manufacturer, but in most cases it's right about 5 years for the actual hat itself, the hard helmet part of it, and 1 year on the suspension. So that's something that each of us should look and say, do we have a plan for what the lifetime of our PPE is? So we need to document things. We already talked the hazard assessment. That certification needs to be documented along with the PPE selection, and training. Anytime we do training, you should document it. So if you're sitting in a group watching this and you haven't passed around a sign-in sheet, you should do that right now. Document who has attended this training. That will help you when OSHA shows up to show what has happened. It also helps us if somebody says, well, you never told me this, it's pretty easy to pull that piece of paper out and say, yeah, we did, here it is. Okay, so we talked that PPE has limitations. One of the biggest problems with PPE is non-use. In this picture, we can see he's got some great goggles, but they're not where they need to be, and they're not going to work if we misuse PPE. I had a guy one day, smart aleck, and he had taken the lenses out of his safety glasses, and he came into the safety office all proud of his glasses. He said, I got my safety glasses on, and but the lenses were missing. So I poked him in the eyes. No, I didn't. We had a talk and tried to refocus him on, hey, it's no skin off my nose if he loses his eyes, except I've got to deal with it. But for him, it's a lifetime injury. Let's use these because it's good for us. Improper selection. We use the wrong stuff. It can be worse than not wearing it at all. PPE wears out, just like everything that we use. Over time, it will wear out, and we've got to know when it's time to replace that. Permeation penetration. Just because you have some gloves that say they're okay for whatever the chemical is we're using, that doesn't mean that they're good forever. Materials will permeate. That means it goes actually through the material on a molecular level. It kind of soaks through. And penetration, that's where it goes through a seam or some sort of an opening and gets in. But it all has some vulnerabilities. And how long it takes for that to go through, we call that breakthrough and permeation time. On that chart with all those gloves, we can see that and see how long it's good for and give us an idea of how long we can use this glove before we have to throw it away. Some things like sunlight, dirt, et cetera, will degrade our PPE. So if you've got that pair of gloves or whatever the PPE, and we leave it in the back of the truck or on the dash in the truck, and it sits in the sun and dust and dirt, chances that it will work correctly and protect us go down with each day that it's exposed to that environment. Doesn't mean that it can't get dirty, but let's look at how we store it. Don't put it out somewhere where it will fail a lot quicker. All right, we need to inspect our personal protective equipment. How do I inspect those? Inspect it before I use it, every time. Even if I get a brand new pair of those chemical gloves, before I go out and stick my hands in sulfuric acid, I'm going to test that and inspect it. I look those over, inspect for holes or any discoloration or something that doesn't look right, and I'm going to test it. I'll take those chemical gloves over to the sink and turn some water on and just test them. Why do I say that? Well, I've seen some brand new gloves come from really good manufacturers that have failed on first use. They've had holes in them when they arrive. Now, I don't like that. It's something that bugs me a lot that a manufacturer would send out an inferior product like that, and I scream to high heaven anytime I've had that happen. Scream at the manufacturer. I've changed manufacturers, but the reality is it's a possibility, and so we need to inspect those each time. Single use really is single use. When you're done, throw it away and ensure that it gets into the trash and goes away. I've seen many OSHA citations for that dust mask that people hung up on the shelf in the workshop because they might use it later, or they just set it down and didn't make sure it got to the trash. And once it's out, that's an OSHA citation because we're improperly storing that respiratory protection. All right. So worker responsibilities. Each of us has responsibilities to wear our personal protective equipment as it was intended, not putting our glasses on the back of our head, not taking the lenses out of our safety glasses. Use it as it is intended, and use it when it is required, and maybe sometimes when it's not required. As an employee, as a user, I'm expected to also keep my PPE clean, sanitary, and avoid situations that could cause it to fail. If I have a problem, I get a new glove and it has a hole in it, report that. So then we can go back to the supplier, the manufacturer, and beat them up and say, this is a problem with this PPE. I had a guy come into my office one day selling some gloves, and he promised me that these things would cure all of my ills for cuts and lacerations. So I was working at a company where we fabricated metal products, and we had basically razor blades everywhere you looked out in this workplace, and we had a lot of people getting cut. And so we tried to engineer out the razor blades, but some of those couldn't be engineered out, and so we selected PPE that was Kevlar. These were gloves and sleeves that would protect these employees' hands and their arms from these really sharp hazards. Guy came into my office one day, said, I will replace all of your Kevlar gloves. This is the best glove that's ever been on the market. We just replaced all of our Kevlar, and that's the stuff they make bulletproof vests out of, by the way. So he hands me this glove, and I look it over and I say, well, that's nice, and I pull out my knife, and I take one of the fingers and double it over my knife and cut it right off. And I threw the glove back at him and said, get out of here. I don't want to talk to you, because and the guy says, I need to make a phone call. We need to buy some. No, I didn't say we need to buy Kevlar, but he was pretty freaked out that his product failed like that. Test it, get the right stuff. If there's a problem with your PPE, report that. It's just like incident investigation. If there's a problem, let's figure it out and make sure the next guy doesn't have that same problem. PPE at home. I just wanted to I moved this slide up a little bit because I wanted to hammer home that safety doesn't end when we punch the time clock. Talk to, whether it's you or employees that you work for you, talk to them about the importance of wearing PPE and practicing safety at home. It's just as easy to get injured in our home workshop, and maybe more easy, because our shops may not be as controlled, our environments may not be as controlled. Talk to your employees about using those, and you know, if an employee takes a pair of pockets a pair of earplugs when they're sighting in their rifle, well, you know what? I think that's probably an okay thing, because if their hearing is damaged, we may have to sort out whether that hearing loss came from personal use or from workplace exposure. So I wouldn't worry a whole lot about an employee taking those dirty earplugs home and using them on their own time. You can have your own policies on that, but let's encourage our employees to use PPE when they're at home. Okay, so here's a question that gets asked a lot: who pays for the personal protective equipment? Who has the responsibility? And the answer is generally the employer is on the hook to pay for all the personal protective equipment. There are certain circumstances where the employer would not be required, or it would be a shared situation where the employer would bear a certain portion of the burden. So those situations might. So just before I dive into that, the average stuff, if safety glasses and gloves are required for a person's job, you've done the certification on that, you're on the hook as an employer to purchase that for the employee and provide that material. Some places there are tasks that are very specific, that an employee may bring their own PPE, but in most cases, even in those situations, the employee may participate. So, safety shoes. If you require safety-toed shoes, and the employee doesn't take those home, the employer bears the burden for that cost. Now, if the employee can take those home and use those shoes on their own time, you could do a shared program where the employee pays a portion of that. And what I've done in companies, and what a lot of companies do, is they look at what's kind of the minimum cost to purchase a pair of safety shoes that meets the requirements that we have, and that's the portion that the company bears. So company will pay $50 towards boots because we went to Walmart and we can see that there's a pair of boots that meets the standard, and they cost $50. And so that's what we will do. Beyond that, if you want boots that are nicer than that, the employee can bear a portion of that. And many companies I worked at, that's what the deal was. We had $50 towards boots, but if I wanted to buy the really nice ones that were $100, I bought that portion of the boots. All right, there was something else I just lost. There was something I was going to talk about. Prescription safety eyewear, kind of a similar situation. If the employee can use this on their own time, then many cases that is a shared cost. But we look at that the same way. I can get those really ugly lenses or frames and lenses, and if that will meet the requirement, the employee doesn't take that home, that's okay. Now, just on prescription eyewear, you can get glasses that will go over somebody's prescription glasses that will meet the safety requirements, the ANSI requirements for that. So you don't necessarily have to buy that, but if you want to participate in that, you can definitely do it. And on this, if the company decides, your organization decides that we're just going to pay the cost on all this, that's totally up to you. You can do that if you like, and that definitely will result in better morale there. And I know a lot of our members that get the TAP award will take that money and turn it right back around into buying new boots for everybody each year, or whatever it is they decide to do that way. Okay. So replacement. When a piece of personal protective equipment is damaged or wears out, who pays for that? In most cases, for normal wear and tear on this equipment, the employer pays for it. However, in cases of intentionally damaged or lost equipment, we can require the employee to pay that cost. Now, we have to realize that over time you're going to have a certain amount of wear and tear. Some things are, safety glasses will get scratched over time. If somebody's coming for a new pair of safety glasses every week, that's excessive, and you can require them to pay for replacement glasses. Or I forgot my glasses today. Well, once or twice is one thing, but if they're a habitual person that forgets to bring their glasses in, make them pony up the cash to buy a new pair, and they'll probably improve their memory a little bit in getting there. We need to make sure that they're wearing it though. So because somebody forgot or lost their PPE, let's not let them go without wearing it. Get the PPE on them, and we'll sort out the dollars and cents after the fact. All right. So I want to go into some of those specifics now, and I'm going to cruise through as many as I can. I told you I've got way too much material in this presentation, but I'm going to dive into it as quickly as I can and talk about some of the specifics for the different areas of PPE. And just a reminder to everybody, use the chat box, use the Q&A box to ask any questions or make any comments that you have. Pretty easy to get information back and forth. Eye and face protection. Eye injuries happen. $300 million per year in eye injuries. 60% of eye injuries were not wearing protective eyewear. Nobody in safety believes that a pair of safety glasses will always protect you. Things can get behind your glasses. They can come in from a different angle. They're not perfect. However, they will protect you from many of the most common and the most serious types of eye injuries, and so people just are not wearing those. I think safety glasses are the most important piece of personal protective equipment, because without your vision, it's pretty hard to have an enjoyment of life. I know you can, but it's not nearly the same if I can't see a lot of the things in my world. So wear that most important piece of personal protective equipment. And really, my opinion is anybody working outside of an office environment should have a pair of safety glasses. If you're mowing your lawn, if you're weed whacking, if you're doing whatever that is out in the shop, hitting something with a hammer, you should have a pair of safety glasses and wear those things. How do I know that they're safety glasses? Well, they have a little mark that will be somewhere on that. Generally, it's on the eyepiece or the earpiece, excuse me, and it will say Z87. Normally, it says Z87.1 or there will be something, or Z87 plus. That's an ANSI standard. That just tells us that this meets the standards to be a pair of safety glasses. If you're welding or cutting, there are shades that we need to have. I talked before about those people using sunglasses. Sunglasses will not protect you from the ultraviolet radiation and other forms of radiation that come off of welding or cutting. So there are specific shades, and they'll have a number on those. A welding hood is going to be a 10 plus. And then there are glasses that we can use for cutting that are shade 3 or 5, depending on the type of light that we're exposed to. If I'm doing some pretty simple things, I can use a shade 3. But if it's a little higher flash, or I'm working around somebody who is welding and there's some arc flash going on around me, I would be looking more at a shade 5. All right. In addition to eye protection, we look at things for face protection. Oh man, I don't know if the video came through or not, but face protection is equally important as eye protection, and when you wear face protection, it should be coupled with your eye protection, safety glasses or goggles, along with the face shield. We want to be able to cover both the front and the sides for materials that are coming in. This is where I'm exposed to flying objects, corrosive liquids or materials that could slash or hit my face. Always look for that Z87 on those things. Prescription glasses are not always safety glasses. You can check the ones that you have for that Z87, but generally we have to go in and purchase those separately. It's kind of an oddity though if you go to the optometrist or wherever you buy your prescription lenses, the safety glasses are generally cheaper than your fashion eyewear. They may not have the same fashion statement, but they will keep your vision intact. Always wear your safety glasses under your face shield. All right. Here's a picture. This is good and bad of eye protection from a company I worked at. The good is we had a problem. And this this face shield is covered with molten metal. This was solder out of a solder pot so we had molten tin lead solder, and there was a problem, and it popped and it splashed this stuff out. Well, it's the good news because this employee was wearing all of his PPE. He had his face shield on. He had coveralls on that were designed for this type of work, gloves, a hat, and all of those things. And there was no injury that took place when a bad thing happened. Now, we went in and worked on the machine to ensure that didn't happen again. But we counted this as a positive thing in a bad situation. The other one is a pair of safety glasses where the person was supposed to be wearing their face shield and they didn't, and they got a splash of material in their face, and you can see where those safety glasses were fogged. Luckily enough, it kept the stuff out of their eyes, but they got a splash on their face and spent some time in a safety shower and had some chemical exposure from this. So when we wear face protection, my recommendation is landscape work. If I'm doing weed whip, that type of work, especially the walk behind type of landscape trimmers where we're going out cutting a field, these really throw materials, and that could be rocks and who knows what. My recommendation is to do it there. Grinding, you should have a face shield hanging on the shelf behind the grinder in your workshop. Pressurized work, so if I'm doing pressure washing or hot taps, have those things available. Even sprinkler work. We've had some really unfortunate incidents where people working on high pressure sprinkler and hot taps in water lines and various places had a blowout, and in at least one situation I know of, a person lost their eye from this pressurized water that came out of a sprinkler line. So these are situations where that would be appropriate. And here's a sample just with a die grinder or an angle grinder where that wheel broke apart and actually penetrated the face shield and touched the person's face as it penetrated, but didn't cause any injury. You can just imagine how serious that would have been without that piece of personal protective equipment. Let's not improvise like this guy. Let's use the appropriate equipment at the right time. Okay, guys, I'm just going to give you a warning here. I've talked about eye protection, and I have to accentuate this with the gory picture. So don't watch this. You can turn your head away for a minute if you don't want to see this slide. But for those of you that just can't get it on the safety glasses, here's the slide. Pretty crazy stuff. When I talk about and I'll go away from this slide, but when I talk about PPE at home, it's not just when we're working. If you're out fishing, particularly types of fishing where you've got people around, or like for myself, I like to fly fish, and so you're casting a lot. I wear glasses. I wear safety glasses in those. They're generally a sunglass, but they're rated for safety when I'm out there casting those flies, so I don't get that hook in my eye. All right, next section, head protection. We talked about this already. Anytime I'm working where there are elevated loads, things that are being hoisted above my head with cranes, with excavators, anytime I'm working in excavations. So if I'm in a trench, I need to have a hard hat on. That's just the rule. And anywhere where there's potential for falling objects or being struck in the head, I need some type of head protection. A couple of different types here. Type 1 is for vertical drop hazards. Somebody drops a bolt or a wrench up above me, this will protect my head from that. Type 2 are designed for vertical and lateral impacts, and they have more of an ability to take a side blow without knocking that off. And in some of our areas where you're doing search and rescue work, they'll use a helmet like that that actually has a chin strap on it to keep that from coming off. But the Type 2 has side protection as well as that vertical drop protection. And then here's some different classes. And this has changed in fairly recent years. Some of the OSHA documentation still uses the old terminology, but these are the appropriate types. Type G is general duty. Falling objects and up to 2,200 volts of electrical power. So this is not for linemen or people doing electrical transmission work. Type E is for electrical service. And so this is for higher voltage, up 20,000 volts and falling objects. This is specifically for electrical workers. There's Type C. These are conductive. This is working in areas where they have static electricity issues. They're actually made out of metal. Generally, it's aluminum material. It provides no electrical protection. As far as I know, we have nobody within the trust that would be wearing a conductive. And you can correct me if I'm wrong if there are certain industries, but just thinking off the top of my head, I don't think of anywhere where we would be using a conductive type a hard hat. And then we have those special situations where, like search and rescue, high-angle rescues, confined space, areas where that hat can be knocked off. There are special helmets like that. Foot protection. So we ask about our. Oh, excuse me. Let me go back. Inside of your hard, I've got to go back on the hard hat. Inside of that, there must be a label in there that says it meets the ANSI standard. Also, we need to document when we put that in service. There is a date on there when it was manufactured, but let's document when we put it into service. You can do that with a magic marker inside that helmet. Let's inspect it regularly and make sure that we've got those. Today's the day to go out and look at your hard hats and see how long we've had those things. There will be a code, or it may be specifically written in there when that hat was manufactured. Foot protection, foot injuries are really common. Anytime you've got any heavy drop hazards, rolling hazards, and you think of a lumberjack where you've got logs that are rolling, or I'm out working with pipe installing pipe in a trench. Any type of heavy industry, we need to have these safety shoes. Oh, and one other item is something that might pierce our soul. I'm working on a construction site where there can be nails or other sharp objects sticking up. Our safety shoes need to meet these standards. There are actually two different standards. OSHA still calls out the ANSI Z41 standard, but most of the footwear that you'll buy now will list the ASTM F2413 standard. That's the actual performance standard that shows what they will do. But just make sure that whatever the footwear is that you're getting, that it meets one of these two standards, and it will be printed on a tag with the inside, generally inside, but sometimes on the outside as well. You can have a steel toe or a composite toe that is more of a carbon fiber or other material that meets the requirements, but it's not as heavy and it doesn't get your toes as cold in really cold weather as a steel toe might. Either of those that meet the standard will work. Puncture resistant soles. If you're working in electrical applications, these shoes should be metal free. All right, lots of different, and so there are tons of different styles of these shoes, and you can get tennis shoes, you can get heavy work boots. So as we're doing our hazard assessment, we should specify that. This next gory picture, warning, warning, warning. Here's a gory picture that I took a long time ago in my career. These are burns. This guy actually bought. Okay, the gory picture's gone. This guy got steel-toed shoes, but he thought, I'm going to wear tennis shoes because they're more comfortable. And so he bought these steel-toe shoes, but behind the steel toe was this fine mesh, really breathable fabric. And the guy was a welder, and he was actually using a cutting torch this day. So he cuts through this material, and the piece of slag falls off, hits the top of his shoe, and melts immediately through this mesh material and drops onto his toe and causes third-degree burns on his toe. And of course, it went into his shoe and he couldn't get it out. So it's burning and burning. And anyway, use the right type of shoe. Just because it meets the ANSI standard doesn't mean it's the right for the application that we're using. When I was just about to graduate from college and go and get a real job, I was working as a metal fabricator, and it came up my time to buy new safety shoes. And so I had my company allotment to go buy some safety shoes, and I went out to the boot truck and I bought safety wingtips. And I walked in with my box under my arm, and my supervisor said in not so nice a way, "What the is that?" This just got me some new boots. I was going for a career change right at that point. So you can buy these in many different styles and meet what we need. All right, I have gone long. I had more materials, and I'm not going to talk about those. I have some presentations saved on our website on respiratory protection as well as hearing protection. Those two are important subjects when it comes to personal protective equipment. Just to wrap up today, the simple things about personal protective equipment: have the right equipment, select it. Document that selection. You need that certification statement. We'll send out some examples for you to use, but every job description that requires any PPE should have a certification done for it. Ensure that our people have the right stuff, and make sure that they're using it and using it appropriately. Are you being a jerk as a supervisor if you ask somebody to put their safety glasses on or their earplugs or whatever? No, you're doing your job. You're doing the right thing as a supervisor, and at the end of the day, you're potentially saving this person's eyesight or whatever part of their body it is by having them use the appropriate personal protective equipment. Folks, we are here to help. If you have questions, if you have concerns about any of this, please let us know. I'm happy to answer any questions now. You can type those into the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll answer those at this time. Doug, Brent, anything that maybe I missed that we should have added while we're waiting for questions?
You did a great job covering, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. I love Brent. He's always good and positive.
Great job.
All right, I see no questions. I'm surprised by that. I thought there would be some questions about who buys the PPE and all of that, but seeing none, I'm going to wrap up the webinar. If you've got questions, give myself, Brent, or Doug a call, and we would be happy to help out and provide any guidance that we can. Thanks so much, everybody. Go out and have a safe day.